to Designing Over the Top, Saints Row the Third Postmortem. Thank you. A couple of reminders, fill out your surveys. They probably got sent to your spam folder like they did to mine. So, take a look at them. Please fill them out. Send that feedback in. That's helpful for us speakers. All right, so we'll start off with me. My name is Scott Phillips. I've been with Volition for 10 years, worked on several titles. I was the design director on Saints Row the Third. Basically what that meant was I was in charge of the high-level concept on the design side, the tone and the feeling of the game, the overall experience, and basically the quality bar of that gameplay. I also did staffing and scheduling, so I spent a lot of time in Excel and Handsoft and all those, joyous design tools. I did some minor camera work, stuff like that, but in general, I tried to stay out of that work because I would generally break something, and nobody wants their director in there messing up with stuff they just finished. Now, Saints Row the Third, we started in 2008, just after Saints Row 2 had finished. The directors of Saints Row 2 moved directly onto Saints Row the Third. We had about 125 people peak at the end of the project, plus QA and outsourcers. So, needless to say, this was Volition and THQ's largest project to date. So there was a lot riding on it for both us and for THQ. Now, what does this talk about? A postmortem is looking at what went right, what went wrong. I'm going to talk about some of the really great moments that we had on the project, some of the really painful ones that we had on the project. I'm going to cover what we tried to do, what things worked, what didn't work, and my hope is that you'll learn something from our pain and be able to use that on your future projects as well. You may have already known a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. You may know some of the ideas that we're going to do, that we're going to talk about. But you'll at least see how we implemented them and where things went right and where they went horribly wrong. So I'm going to cover three main areas in this postmortem. The first one is, why was the franchise successful? Saints Row 1 and Saints Row 2 had both sold about 4 to 5 million units. Saints Row 2 was just coming out when we started Saints Row 3. It went on to sell 4 to 5 million units. Both received relatively good review scores in the 80s. But success wasn't certain. It's not certain with any sequel, and I think some of the talks I saw yesterday put a nice point on this. I think the Portal 2 guys said, a new franchise is much easier because you're breaking new ground and people don't know what to expect. With a sequel, there is a built-in set of expectations of, what is that game going to be and what is the sequel going to be? How are you going to change it? How are you going to keep it the same? So for us, one of the biggest elements of that was the over-the-top feeling, the tone of the game, as I'm going to go to talk about. There's a great quote from Walt Disney about sequels. He said, "You can't top pigs with pigs." Basically, he was talking about they had done a Three Blind Pigs short that had won an Oscar. It was a huge success, and they were convinced to continue making more of them. So they made several more, and each was less and less successful. Basically, what he was saying is you can't give people the same thing. And it's not really a problem that's new, but it's also not a problem that has been solved or can be solved, really. The second thing I'm going to talk about is raising the quality bar. Visual and quality issues were the number one cited issues in reviews for Saints Row 2. We got hit on things like inconsistent or repetitive missions and lack of creativity. On the other side, we were praised for their fun factor, no-holds-barred action, and the over-the-top crazy gameplay. So we knew in 3 years, when Saints Row the Third was going to come out, that we were going to have to raise that bar to compete. So I'm going to touch on three things here. There's holy shit moments, our pacing, and our playtesting. I'll get into those more a little later. And the third one is scope control. Now, this is a really difficult issue to deal with. It's really hard to define, what's the right amount of stuff to have in the game. We had just come off of Saints Row 2, where the mentality was, let's put every single feature we can possibly think of in the game. If that game had it, well, we need to put it in our game, and we'll do it this slightly different way. What ended up is that we wasted a lot of time near the end of the project adding in features that we shouldn't have. And because of this, we shipped with more bugs than we wanted, and we shipped with a lower quality across the board than we wanted. So with Saints Row the Third, we wanted to focus on fewer, better features. So setting the tone. Tone is a pretty nebulous term. I think if you look at different mediums, how they describe tone, how they talk about it, is not very specific. It's tough to define what that feeling is. I think one of the best ways to talk about it is this quote. Tone can be as important as text. Basically, what you're saying, how you're going to say something is more important or can be more important than what you're saying. Now, I'm not really going to try and define what tone is, but I'm going to use some descriptions and then walk into how we use tone and how we define it. Let's look at an example of tone. Batman. Now, Batman's been around for 70 years. He's been through numerous incarnations. But there's always, the Batsuit. There's always Gotham City. There's always the Joker. Now, when I said Batman, which one did you picture? Did you picture the 1960s Batman? Michael Keaton, Val Kilmer, George Clooney. I always forget his name. Christian Bale, that's it. Or one of these many, many other types or incarnations of Batman. Now, if you look at it, the 1960s Batman versus the Dark Knight, they're incredibly different emotional experiences. But why? They cover the same characters, same content, same general storylines. They're different in the emotional impact that they have on the viewer. The 1960s Batman was goofy, was ridiculous, shark repellent, and all these, running around with bombs over his head. The Dark Knight is a very serious, very realistic movie. Now, tone, for me, has two primary elements. There's the creative boundaries, and then there's the emotional experience, or what you could also call the player experience for us in games. And what you want is you want the team to be like Goldilocks. You want everyone to be able to say, no, that's too crazy, or no, that's too tame. Let's find something right in the middle that's just right for what we're trying to do with this game. Now, we had just come off of Saints Row 2. And Saints Row 2, we had a very difficult time coming up with what is that creative box. What are we going to fit into? In a game where you go from running around nude, vehicle surfing on top of a car, to the next minute, you're chasing a lieutenant who's being dragged behind a car, mercilessly bloodied, and then you mercy kill him in order to put him out of his misery. Now, those are very, very different emotions. The tone was not well defined in Saints Row 2. We refined it through trial and error. We tried a bunch of different things. We would throw out ideas. We would see what stuck. The problem was that inconsistencies were all over the place, just as I mentioned there with those examples. Now, with Saints Row the Third, we wanted to have a cohesive experience. That was one of our main goals, was the whole experience should feel like it's one note. It's the same feeling you get throughout the entire game. But that's difficult, especially when you want to have these crazy experiences. So we had fart in a jar was one of our weapons. Initially, I thought this weapon was ridiculous. I thought there was no, it didn't make sense in the game. It didn't really make sense as a combat effective tool. But in the end, we put it in because, partially because fans asked for it, and partially because it's just a pretty funny weapon. It's enjoyable. As a player, you're going to have fun with it. Now, if the tone is solid, everybody's going in the same direction. You're all working towards the same goal. If the tone is confused, you're constantly fighting each other. You're going nowhere. So our question was, what should SR3 be? Should it be over the top? Should it be serious but silly? Or should it be self-aware and unrepentant, just there to have fun? Should it be gangsta? Should it be gangster? Very different experiences for the player. What should it feel like to be a Third Street saint? Now, our major problems, as I mentioned, was that the tone was ill-defined from the past games. Saints Row 1 had a relatively set. They wanted to make I think the description of it was like an MTV music video. But they also had insurance fraud. You could jump in front of, you got money to jump in front of cars. Didn't really make a whole lot of sense with an MTV music video. Saints Row 2, we kind of pushed that a little further, where you're driving around in a truck spraying shit on people, And then we also had that dark narrative, where you put Merrill's girlfriend into the trunk of a car and then put her into the monster truck race, and then Merrill smashes her to death. That's pretty very different things. Now, since we didn't have much to start from, we were kind of coming at it fresh. And we were also coming at it fresh with our team. Because by the time Saints Row the Third shipped, we had only 20% of the team had shipped a past Saints Row title. Now, that's a pretty huge amount of difference between the past game and Saints Row the Third. This meant that, people didn't have that automatic knowledge of, what is Saints Row? Oh, well, we did it this last time. I think I have a good idea. It's not too bad. We were getting people from different teams within Volition. We were getting people from outside of our studio. The problem was we had a lack of buy-in in what the game was. People didn't know what they were making, and they were constantly confused about, is fart in a jar, is that too far? Well, what about this other thing that I'm working on? I'm trying to write a spec for this. I don't really know what I'm trying to make. Now, this led to, what I use the description of soft versus hard power. There's, you can guide someone, you can direct them, which is what, a director, as myself, should have been doing. And then you can mandate things. You can say, all right, you bring me your problem, this is your answer. Bring me your problem, this is your answer. The problem with something like that is that you have people that are renting those ideas. They don't really own what they're working on. And if they don't own what they're working on, they don't really care as much. They're not as invested in the final product or even in that initial idea. And since designers are advocates for the player, for the entire experience, if they're not buying into what the game is going to be, who is? Who will? Now, our second problem was that for the first 6 months or so, Saints Row the Third went a very different direction. We started off with the idea that the player was an undercover agent infiltrating the Saints. You were, an FBI agent, something along those lines. You were doing this in order to allow the player to make choices. We wanted choice to be a much bigger part of the game. So you were making these choices of, at the end of the mission we go and we find there's a big bale of cocaine. Should I turn it into the FBI? Should I give it to the Saints? Each of those had different paths. And so we were making the game that I think I would have been fun, but the question was, is this a Saints Row game? And the very clear answer was no, this is not a Saints Row game. So this caused, about 6 months in, we reset. We reset the story, we reset the idea of a lot of the top-level design. That was good. We were back on a better track. We were back on the track that we would eventually ship on. The problem was that was even more confusion. We were asking the team that had just wasn't buying into the initial vision, we were asking them to now reset and look at another vision and figure out how to make that game. The result was confusion. Confusion. People didn't know what to do. They weren't sure about what they were making. They had lack of confidence in the vision. We had to explain and re-explain. Well, myself, I had to re-explain constantly, answer questions about, well, I'm doing this. I don't know what you want. It was my problem. It was something that I needed to fix. And the good news was that we could actually fix it. We needed to resolve this as soon as possible, because if the team wasn't clear on what the game was that we were making, we were never going to be able to make that game. So how did we try to get everyone on the same page? The first thing we did was we had a lot of brainstorming meetings. We got the design team together. We would sit down and we would talk about, what does over-the-top mean to you? Now, over-the-top had been used on Saints Row 1 and Saints Row 2 as a very general description of, this is what the game is. It's over-the-top. When we started Saints Row the Third, people started asking a lot more questions, and especially with the initial different direction. They were asking the question of, what does over-the-top mean? Is it, really vicious murder? Is it fart in the jar? And The problem was it's somewhere in there, and we can't put our finger on, this is exactly what we're making. So what we started to do was come up with a mantra. We wanted people to be thinking about something as they were working on systems. We came to embrace the crazy, fun trumps all. That kind of codified what we wanted designers to be thinking about. It was helpful, to be sure. And over the top, as luck would have it, was still kind of the buzzword for the team, for the rest of the project, and probably for any future projects in that franchise. I think over the top will be a key element of what the game is. The next thing we did was we did team presentations. We would, myself, the producer, we would sit up in front of the entire team, ask them to come to lunch meetings or ask them to come to at the team meeting. We would just talk about, here's what our plan is for the crazy missions that we're going to do in the game. And then we would talk about it. And this started to help getting people to ask those difficult questions of, like, I don't understand why this fits. And getting that out in the open helped greatly. Movie outings was a big help as well. Just getting people, I think, the best one I think we saw was the A-Team. I mean, that's a movie you could call over the top. It was pretty ridiculous. It was funny. It was a summer blockbuster. The tone video is something I'm going to show in a minute here. Basically, we ripped up a bunch of movies. We put it to a music track, and we wanted to capture the feeling of Saints Row. And then finally, there's aha moments, or what I'm calling aha moments. Basically, there are points in the game where something happened and we realized, yes, that's it. I think we've found something that is exactly what we want it to be, what we want this game to be, and I can see it. Everyone on the team could say, okay, I know where we're going. Now, the tone video, this might be a little loud, just as a warning. We ripped up a bunch of movies, including Shoot 'Em Up, Bad Boys 2. Myself and the producer, looked for what should the player feel like as they're playing Saints Row the Third. We also put it to a music track, which our producer picked, and I think, initially I fought him on it. I didn't think I thought it was too out of date. Now I know that I was totally wrong. So here we go. So personally, I think that helped greatly. Like that still gets me psyched. I love hearing that, seeing all that crazy shit going on. It's good stuff. That is what we wanted the game to feel like. Now, aha moments. The dildo bat. I think people have probably read about this. Marketing definitely ran with it. They went nuts with this. Initially, it was just one bullet-pointed weapon on one mission spec out of 30 to 50 mission specs. It was not a big part of the game. Now, when the weapon artist took it, and I think the line item description was just dildo weapon. So he took that and he made a giant 6-foot-long enormous dildo. Push things beyond. There's games that have done dildo bats before. We knew this. Everyone else, that made games knew this as well. So we wanted something that was even crazier. So he took that, brought it to the technical rigger who rigged it up, got it all floppy. Brought it to the audio guys who added in some wet, floppy, slapping sounds. And then we put this in game. And the team just loved it. It really felt like awesome. I feel like I'm playing something that I'm not going to get anywhere else. This is a really enjoyable game. Now, interestingly, we showed this to our producer who was incredibly scared. He was kind of like, oh my God, there's no way, THQ's not going to buy this, the ESRB's not going to buy this. So he sent it off to our marketing guys, and I think their response back was, we love it. They absolutely loved it, and I think you can tell through our marketing campaign that they really loved it. It was a big differentiator. I totally get why they used it, and this was just a nice moment for I think the team to really gel and feel like, yes, we know what Saints Row is now. Now the lessons learned: the team must own the tone and the vision. This was something, that I learned the hard way on Saints Row the Third. I think there's a lot of other postmortems where they'll talk about the things they did to set this up. I saw the Deus Ex talk yesterday morning, and I thought it was great. They did a lot of really smart stuff, and we did some stupid stuff. But we learned from our mistakes, and we've done a much better job. Tone is very tough, especially for a game like Saints Row, where we still do have some discrepancies looking back on it. We have insurance fraud, we have the dildo bat, but we also have a moment where one of the enemies viciously cracks the neck of one of the other enemies. I think it's not as bad. Like one of my main things coming out of Saints Row 2 was I didn't want the player to be a dick. I felt in Saints Row 2 that a lot of times, especially in the Brotherhood arc, for those who remember it, the player did some pretty vicious things. And I found myself saying, that's not my player. I've been playing this game to have fun. Like I don't want to be a jerk. But we still ended up with some of these things. So tone is very tough for us. It might not be as tough for other games. There's, let's see, what is it? Uncharted, I think they have something along, their tone is something along the lines of play Indiana Jones. That's got it. You don't need to do too much more than that. That explains the game. The final element was use multiple methods. Do a lot of different things. You can't just have one thing that, this word is the tone. You need to do a lot of things. There is no one-size-fit-all. There were people on our team who felt, the video didn't make any sense. They didn't understand it. They didn't understand Embrace the Crazy. There were individuals who they liked that, but they didn't like this element. So you got to find something that can kind of hit everybody. You got to find multiple things that can hit the entire team. Now, design briefs are something we're using, going forward, to kind of, the goal is before you've written what something is going to be, write down the problem you're going to solve. And I think I haven't used this personally very much, but I'm looking forward to seeing what we're going to do with it. And I think probably in one of these coming GDCs we'll talk about it a little bit. And then vision trailers are fantastic. I think probably everybody in here, I would imagine we're all design professionals, saw the Splinter Cell, I don't remember not Splinter Cell, Rainbow Six Patriots vision trailer that came out maybe 4 or 5 months ago. That was a obviously fantastic tool, something they felt so proud of that they wanted to put out to the public, years before the game is going to hit the shelves. So these vision trailers it's tough to find the time to make them, but it's absolutely worth every second of your time. So now that we know what the game is going to feel like, how are we going to make sure that the gameplay we create is crazy? We want wow. We want more than wow. We want holy shit. Now, Saints Row 2, we had we had sections in our docs where we would write wow moments. We wanted something that was cool, that was players would remember. With Saints Row the Third, we wanted to up our ante, up our hyperbole, and call them holy shit moments. They were things that you were going to remember forever. They were water cooler moments. In addition to that, we wanted every mission to contain some over-the-top element. We didn't want any FedEx missions. FedEx would be, okay, I have to start here, and then I have to drive there, pick up something, and then deliver it to somebody else. Those sorts of missions were not something we wanted any of. We wanted even the smaller missions, even mini missions. We wanted to have some crazy element that players were going to be impressed by. The major problem is that paper specs don't guarantee fun. We found this on Saints Row 2, and I'm sure everybody else has found it at some point. You have this amazing idea. You think it's going to be the best thing ever. You write it down. You feel really proud of the spec. And then it gets in game, and you're like, oh, my God, this is awful. Sometimes you won't admit it for a while. I know I'm guilty of that. But just writing it down doesn't make it the best thing ever. We had a couple of these elements in Saints Row 2 where the Johnny Gat gurney mission. There was a mission where you go to the hospital. Johnny Gat, one of your main lieutenants, is injured. You have to get him on the gurney, and then you have to fight your way out as you're pushing him, shooting your machine gun at enemies who are rushing in. You're running through the hospital at top speed. It sounds like it could be pretty cool, but it wasn't. It wasn't very fun. And then we had this sword battle, a big sword battle at the end of the Ronin arc, or in the middle of the Ronin arc, where the player was avenging the people who attacked Johnny Gat. You were going to go and murder this, I think it was Junichi, and you were going to do it using his own weapon. You were going to stab him. You were going to slice up all the Ronin. But we did it really late, and it also did not end up being very fun. Now, everything we do on a big game like this, Saints Row was, like I said, over 100 people, takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money. So we can't just set out a course lightly. We need to know as much as possible that what we're going to do is going to work. So our solution was pre-visualization. This is Avatar here. I think everyone has seen what they've done. They've seen, Hollywood uses this to great effect. And I think video games need to start using it more. I'm a former animator, so I really like that sort of visual, seeing things move as they're really going to move. Now, previs is fantastic because it convinces skeptical groups. It convinces programmers who often are very not eager, shall we say, to take on very, very difficult things or things that they don't think are going to be possible. It all leads into buy-in. You want something that people can look at and say, that's cool. I think if we change this, we could make it even better. Showing them something makes it a lot easier to get someone behind your idea. The other element was that we wanted to prototype things as early as possible. You never know what's going to work, and you want to figure out, fail early, fail often. That's that sort of mantra. And almost nothing we ever do is final the first time. I always fall into that trap where I think, yes, I've got it. The spec is great. We're not going to need to change anything. Everything's going to work out perfectly. And then we get it in game, and invariably either I've left out something or something didn't get implemented, or, oh my God, this other system, because we're an open world game, is screwing with this thing I wrote, and so now it doesn't work. I wanted to mention that there was a talk I saw, I think 3 years ago, by Mass Effect 2 level designers, which I really learned a lot from, about how they break down the phases of development for their missions. This was something that I took back to Volition, and we kind of worked through, how do we set different stages of, is this ready? Is this fun? How can we make it more fun? And when is it really finished? It was a great help. We didn't use exactly what they did because our game is different, but it was great help, and that's one of the reasons why I love GDC and why I want to, hopefully give you something back. Now, I'm going to show, I think, 3 previs movies here. This first one is for the first mission in the game. This is essentially at the end of the first mission. The player is robbing a bank at the very beginning of the game, wearing a costume, so that you wouldn't have to customize as the very first thing in the game, because I felt it was very important that the player get right into the action, not that you're thrown, you watch a cutscene and then you have to go through this giant UI system. That's not the feeling I wanted for the game. So the player starts off wearing a costume. He gets on top of the vault, which is pulled out by a helicopter, and then it goes smashing around the building, smashing through things, destroying stuff while the player is fighting off waves and waves of SWAT. So here is the previs that we did. Interspersed with, in the background, is the actual game, the final shipping product. I think you'll see a lot of similarities, and I'm going to stop it at one point here. All right, let's get rolling. Spliced out things, and we've cut it up to shorten the time here. Now, initially in the previs here, we had a boss. We ended it with the player throwing a grenade at a helicopter, and then in slow-mo, you would shoot the grenade, and the grenade would blow up, and the helicopter would lose its stabilization and would come crashing into you. Because of co-op, we weren't going to really be able to do any sort of slow-mo, and so also through development, we figured out, like, okay, this is all cool looking, but for 2 minutes the player is just shooting random people and doesn't feel any sort of progress, doesn't feel like they've, who is their enemy? Why are they still here? And so in the final product, I think you'll notice that there's a single helicopter that seems to keep coming back. It's got this, we put a red marker over the top of it to make it clear, like, this is your boss. So we essentially added a boss once we got to in-game. Previs there is the, here comes the grenade moment.
Oh, shit.
So that was about 2 years before we got to that final product there, that we had that previs. It was enormously helpful to say, this is what we're trying to hit. It took us a long, long time to get there, but because we knew this is what we want to do, it was much, much easier to convince the team and to make sure that that happened. Now, our second mission, we wanted to start off with some big moments, so we got the bank vault, we got this. There's a skydiving. I wanted the entrance to the city to kind of be this, what is the coolest, most over-the-top way to come to a city? And it felt like skydiving out of a plane that you had just jumped out of while shooting enemies, and then you land in the city seemed like a pretty cool way to do it. All right, so let's hit this. So we had just very brief snippets of, this is what general idea of what the camera is going to be. This is the enemies you're going to be shooting. And we got that in game, and we pretty much realized, like, you're not going to want to do this for 3, 5, 6 minutes. And so in one of the gameplay reviews where we got, all the different disciplines to sit together and play through the mission, somebody, I don't know where it came from, but the idea was we needed to get something in the middle of the mission to break it up and kind of reset and up the stakes. So I thought back to the movie Eraser. I'm a big Arnold Schwarzenegger movie fan. So if you remember that movie at all, there was a point where James Caan is the bad guy. Schwarzenegger has just jumped out of this plane that James Caan took over. James Caan convinces the pilot to turn the plane around, and then for the next couple minutes you see that plane coming right at Schwarzenegger as he's freaking out. Ah! So he shoots at the plane dodges him. That moment felt pretty over the top. It felt like something that would fit right in Saints Row. And so we built this moment that was even more ridiculous, as you'll see. So yeah, we made it just a tad more unrealistic than what Arnold did. Now the last one here went through a lot of iteration. This is a moment at the end of the first act of the game where you finally get to reach your ultimate villain, Philippe Loren, who convinced you that he killed Johnny Gat, and now you're breaking into his tower, and this is the culmination of many hours of work, and you're going to kill him. And so the idea was you're going to drop one of these giant 600-ton skyscraper counterweights on top of him. This moment, it ended up that there was a technical difficulty with animating the way we animate stuff. The further it moves away from the origin point of where the animation started, the less accuracy it gets. And so this tower wasn't actually big enough for us to create the gameplay we wanted to, and so we had to send you down to the bottom, and then we send you up to the top again, and then you fall again. And the animators were pulling their hair out. It just wasn't working. So we ended up compromising near the end of the project to get something cool in there, just to even have this moment.
Knock this thing loose! I'm gonna crush that son of a bitch!
Leave it to me.
Hurry it up! He's getting away!
Initially, you had to shoot the ball free, but in the final game, your buddies free it for you.
Frenchie! Get off my damn ball!
So halfway through the video there, you saw what we called a brute, which was a giant 8-foot-tall character, come and run up and jump up on the ball. This was another case of where we didn't have a boss. Like, this was a sequence that, for a very short period of time, it looks very cool, but then when you actually want to play it or want to do any sort of extended gameplay on it, it gets kind of tired. And so we introduced a boss character that upped the ante, made it much more interesting. So lessons learned, previs is great. I love it. As a former animator, I love doing this stuff. I didn't work on any of these. This was the cinematic artists and the animators who did all these, and then the gameplay programmers made this stuff happen, which was phenomenal. Those guys spent long time and a lot of hours, invested a lot of themselves in making sure that these things came together. Previs builds that buy-in that you need. It's vital. And, as the old saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So anytime you can show a picture to someone of what you're thinking versus sending them an email or writing a spec, do that. Here's a terrible mock-up I did mash up for what ended up being our Johnny Gat I don't even know if it had a name, Johnny Gatmobile, which was a giant Johnny Gat head on the front of a van. You know, this sort of thing is really simple, and people enjoy it. It's, you know, you take 5 or 10 minutes, produce something that the team will be able to look back on and will sell that idea really quickly. You know, this seems obvious, but when you're busy, you don't always want to spend the time to do that, but it is very worthwhile. Now, something we're doing at the studio moving forward with is sketching. Our studio design director is pushing for all the projects to do sketches of, basically, instead of brainstorming, you all get together. You don't work together at first. You all draw out ideas. You have a problem that you want to solve. You draw out ideas. The idea is to get as many ideas out there as fast as possible and then work together to figure out what are the best ones. The next step of previs, obviously, is then you want to animate that. But if you can start with something very simple, just a drawing, that's the next step versus trying to write a very detailed design spec. Getting everyone involved early is vital. We wanted to include the art, code, production. We wanted to get everyone involved. It can happen where design kind of isolates itself and becomes like a black box to the rest of the team, and that does not work well. You want everyone on the team to be invested in the entire game and all the ideas that are there. They might have something that's better than what you thought up. And whenever you can, let the team that's working on it just go. Don't try and drive things from above. Be realistic. You can't do it all. We can't do it all. As I'll talk a little bit later about scope control, it's really tough. Now that we've got our big holy shit gameplay moment, let's go to how do we make it fun? How do we make it paced well? Now the goal with pacing is very simple: create better experiences. That's, you know, you can't really define. It's going to change based on what your game is, what your pacing is intended to be. What I'm going to talk about is not the second-to-second pacing or, you know, putting an enemy in the player's view, but, you know, carrying their vision from left to right, not that sort of stuff. Ours was, where we focused on pacing was the overall experience, the emotion of playing the game, the emotion of playing that mission. The problem was that Volition did not have a lot of experience doing this. There wasn't a lot to draw on from other projects. We always ended up, we would put things in game and then we would play them until they felt fun. And we ended up having to rely on, you know, just everybody hopefully having a good idea of what pacing meant. Additionally, open world makes this stuff very hard to pace because anything can happen, and you always have to have tons and tons of little optional things that you need to turn off, or, oh, well, I don't want cars spawning in this area, or, you know, oh, we don't need helicopters in this one. It screws up this thing that I'm trying to do. We write a lot of mission specs, and those are good for asset identification. They're good for getting the entire idea out there, but they're not good for timing. They're not good for knowing how things are going to feel. The other problem was that we had no common vocabulary. Pacing is a very difficult term to define, and there's not a lot of unity in terms of how people talk about pacing. There's not a lot of, you know, tension and tempo, and you can talk about it musically, you can talk about it in all sorts of different ways, and just throughout the industry, we don't have a good vocabulary of these are what these terms mean and how they should be used. Just, you know, do a search on Gama Sutra for pacing. You're going to find articles with all different sorts of things, all different sorts of ideas, and you're going to have to figure out for yourself what you're going to do. So the way we went about it was I worked with the studio design director, Jason Scott, to figure out what was available. What could we draw on? This was probably about 2.5 years into the 3-year project that I really started pushing for. We need to solve this. We don't have, our pacing is not good. We need to improve it. So what we found, or I think what he found was the best example was this pacing visualization of pacing as a cycle, as a circular cycle. You know, going from building action, this is the basic gameplay, to the crisis where something goes wrong and you need to react, to the climax where things get even worse and you need to figure out how are you going to come back from that precipice. And then the payoff where things go great and you figure out how to do it. And then the reversal where, oh my God, this new thing happened that's going to drive us back into that cycle. All of these pieces flow together pretty well. One issue is that you can't use this as a rule book. You can't always have all of these elements, and you can't always use the same sort of reversals. There's definitely times where you don't want the player to feel like, oh, that carrot is right there, I might be able to, no, you jerk, you pulled it away. You don't always want the player to feel like they just failed, but sometimes you do. So it's a very fine line. This is what I came up with. This is using a program called Mind Manager. This is a breakdown of the second mission in the game, going from left to right, top to bottom. Basically, what I wanted to do was visualize what a mission looked like so that we could figure out where we had holes. Where are we missing a reversal? Where are we missing a payoff? What this helped us do was, you can see, this was where we shipped the mission. So I think we had a pretty good idea of, we had added in reversals, we had added in that airplane flying right towards you. That was a great reversal that we added in. This is a little more detail. There's one mission that I wanted to mention or use as an example. We had mission 11 was the player was fighting against Stag, which was this military force that we brought in that had these futuristic lasers and VTOL jets that could transform from helicopters to airplanes. Initially, at the end of this mission, you had been blowing up all these Stag bases, all these little pockets of their troops and their little base units. And then at the very end, you went to save your buddy named Oleg, and you go to the park, and you kill a couple tanks, and you kill a couple of VTOLs. The problem was it was basically the same as everything you'd been doing the rest of the mission. So we didn't really pay it off. You just kind of, mission's over. You saved your friends, which is great. That was a great payoff, but players didn't care. What we did was we ended up we moved that element earlier. We added in a whole new element where you had to fly out over the sides of the city. You were put on a timer, told, oh my God, if you don't get to this giant AWACS plane and blow it up, we're gonna all lose, and the whole mission could be a failure at this point. So we put a timer on the player, told them that they have to do this under time pressure, made the stakes important, and then you had this cool airplane that you had never seen before flying over the city, being escorted by other VTOLs. So it was a pretty good sequence where we figured out, this is not ending well, and we only really figured it out once we had started doing these pacing maps. Now, the future of pacing is still a work in progress. We're still figuring out what pacing means to us. How do you pace open world? Are we only pacing the missions? We're still talking about it. We have a group talking about it right now at the studio. There's actually a GDC talk that was given by Jason Scott, our studio design director, just an hour ago. If you have the GDC Vault, I would suggest you go and watch it. It's a really interesting talk about the studio design groups that Volition has, where we basically get all the designers together, break them up into groups. We figure out what topics we want to talk about as designers, and then we work through them with clear end goals on what we're going to figure out, what we're going to deliver at the end of that. Now, pacing was one of those where I felt it was really necessary for our project to figure out better ways to do it. Additionally, this is as we've been working on these pacing. I broke out the pacing cycle, and I think I started to feel like we're not really in a cycle because the game is always moving forward. We're always kind of ramping things up for the player, and so I started to feel like it's more of a wave. Like that wave can start small, it can get big. The whole game, I think, will feel more like this. This is still a work in progress. I'm still figuring out, how do we even visualize with this? Is this going to be fun? One of the other designers is not a big fan of how this works. Now, playtesting, I'm not going to go into it too much. Lots of other talks have covered it. We did, I think, cross-project critiques where groups of the designers got together from another project. They would play our game. They would give us feedback within certain sets that we wanted to get feedback on. They were very helpful. We ran those for about a year. So it looks like I'm getting short on time, so I'm going to speed up here. Lesson learned, GDC, our GDC talk on Jason Scott's talk. Go see that. Playtesting is fantastic. Everybody should use it if they don't already. And then additionally, which you're not at, there's a Volition talk right now by Jordan Lin, who runs our playtesting lab, that you can also see on the Vault. Now, scope control is very tough. Saints Row 2, we added tons of stuff constantly. Now, the problem is, who can tell me what exact size the game should be? How many features should it have? How many missions should it have? How are we going to sell 20 million units? What is the right number? It's really difficult to define that. So what we did was we dumped everything we wanted to do onto our schedule, and then we started figuring out we need to start cutting stuff. So every 3 to 4 months, we would cut things. We had 26 of these in total. Some were meetings where all the directors would get together and talk about, I don't like this feature, or I think this is going to be too tough. Sometimes the producer would come to us and say, I don't think this feature is really going to work, or I don't think this is worthwhile. Let's just kill it. We ended up killing about 4,000 man days of scheduled work throughout the project. The project pillars helped us. I think a lot of other projects do this. This was a fun image of Johnny Cat doing the Howling at the Moon, or the Three-Wolf Moon, playing keyboard. But anyway, the pillars are the important part. They helped us to define what are the important elements of the game. We also did custom and core mission definitions. We had some missions where we said, this is only going to use core features. We're not going to add any new functionality for it. We had missions like the skydiving where we said, we're going to do every awesome thing. We're going to make this the best mission we possibly can. Yes. So here is one of the features that we ended up cutting. We called it free gunning. This kind of a combination of the Assassin's Creed sort of parkour plus shooting with a gun. It's pretty, the name kind of defines it all. It was a pretty cool feature. It looked really neat. It was fun to slide over cars, to run against walls and all that sort of stuff. But in an open world with tons of AI, tons of vehicles, all kinds of crazy stuff going on, this feature, we spent about a year on it, and we probably could have spent way, way longer. We ended up cutting it, just like we had cover. We cut cover because it didn't fit with what we wanted to do. But free gunning really fit with our goals of fast, fluid, and fun combat. Now, the outcomes of this, I think we shipped with a lot of really cool stuff. I think we had a lot of variety. We had cyberspace. We had a Stag helicarrier. We had Professor Genki. We had a mission on Mars. We had a lot of really amazing stuff in the game. Mars was something that was interesting because it was constantly on the cutting board. It was a very difficult push for me. I wanted to have 2 endings to the game. And that was very hard to sell to the producer because he's very much in, you want every player to see every single thing that you did because we're spending a ton of time making all this stuff. In the end, I think it was the right thing to keep it, and I think a lot of that went to because the mission designer who owned that mission really wanted it to be in the game and spent a lot of his own time to make sure that it got in the game. He had that ownership of Mars. The main problem was, at the end of the project, we didn't have enough people. We grabbed most of the programmers, a lot of the artists and designers from other parts of the studio, other parts of Volition. We ended up with too much stuff. We should have cut more. It's a lesson that, I need to learn, I need to get better at personally, but at least, like AA, admitting you have a problem is the first step. It's really, really hard to do this. Scope control is really, really difficult for me. But we should have cut more. Going forward, I find that I constantly have to reevaluate and constantly think about this, that it's really hard. Now, what I learned, we'll end here. We got the tone and the pillars are very, very important. You want the entire team on board with what you're doing. Prototyping is fantastic. Previs is fantastic. You want to know what you're making before you spend the time making it. Figure out what your weaknesses are. Whatever that is for your game, look at it. Look at what's available in the industry and start working on making it better. For us, I would imagine for other people, it's really easy to have the best ideas ever and want to get every single thing in the game because it's awesome. This thing is going to be amazing. Every designer is going to envy me because this is the best thing ever. But you can't do everything, and you probably don't want to do everything because your game won't ship until 2030. And for us specifically, it was don't fear, embrace your content. We are an over-the-top, polarizing game. Some people love Saints Row, some people hate Saints Row. But we wanted to make a Saints Row game, and we ended up, in my opinion, really building on what had been done in the past. And so that's my talk. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I think we got a couple minutes, so probably less than 5.
Okay, I've got one. So you're talking about tone earlier, and especially in Saints Row 2, that you had this conflict between over the top and then very dramatic. And I've played Saints Row 3, loved it. I thought it was an amazing game, and certainly based on your goals, it certainly seemed to achieve them. But thinking about that, think about, say, just for argument's sake, your tone is goofy comedy, and you're doing a 2-hour movie. You can pull that off and you'll be pretty consistent. Maybe you need 10 minutes of a little drama to set the scene. But when we're now talking about an open world game where you're going from 8 hours to 10 hours to 12 or even 20 or even more, can you really stick to that tone? Like, what do you feel about? Because honestly, you say these things about Saints Row 2, and I played that, but personally, I liked a lot of that drama, even though it was a counterpoint, because it felt like that gave that really long experience some depth. Where if it's much more consistent in a particular tone, it sort of gets a little stale over time. Do you have any feelings on balancing between those two, especially over that longer experience?
Yeah, so the question is about Saints Row 2 had that difference, and so maybe that helped with an 8 to 10 hour experience. My opinion is that because it's an open world game, there's so much stuff you can choose to do at any different point that in a lot of ways you set what you're going to experience. I can totally see that point, and in the reviews, the one that I really found interesting was the Zero Punctuation Yahtzee review, where he absolutely loved SR2, but then he felt kind of disappointed by SR3 because it was, well, it was too cohesive, like it was too much of the same thing. So kind of to your point, I don't know that there is a perfect way to do it. I think if you start to switch between one and the other, or the player doesn't know what to expect, I think with Saints Row 2, it was kind of nice that the story was maybe a little more serious, and then the activities were goofy, so you kind of had your choice of what it was. So I can see where that, maybe not criticism, but where that opinion comes from. There's probably not a right answer for it. Our goal was to make it cohesive, and I think we did with the art and the gameplay both kind of fitting with that over the top. So, maybe in the future it'll change back to something more akin to Saints Row 2. Who knows?
Thanks.
Hi, I'm over here. So I love the way that the fun at all costs thing worked not only into the aesthetic but into a lot of the individual systems designs, and some of that stuff seemed very once you saw it, it made perfect sense, being able to dive into the through the windshield of a car and not have to wait for the opening animation. But what were the decisions like for something like the upgrade system, where you can essentially become invincible to things, and oftentimes that's something that's very hard to work with the players, and you worry about it basically being a cheat code that could make the experience stale or something. Did you guys wrestle with that at all, and what was the process?
So the question is about making the player invincible, I guess. I think with the upgrades, we wanted players who really put their time into it to get the kind of ultimate reward out of it. I do see the point about, especially for us with DLC, I think it was, honestly, it was a mistake. It was a mistake. It was an afterthought where we were oh my God, we didn't think about that player that played for 80 hours and is probably more likely to buy DLC, and now DLC is not really balanced for them. I think that was kind of a mistake. Well, wrap up now or last question? Okay. Yeah, I think I wanted to reward the player for spending all their time and just make them feel that their effort had really been worth it and they got everything they wanted out of that. And I felt, for me personally, that if I'm invincible, if I've spent that 40, 50 hours, whatever, that I want to be invincible. I want to just run around and kick ass. Maybe it is kind of a cheat code.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was cool you guys did it. It seemed like a departure. So, yeah. Thanks.
Thanks.